to take some of this information that you've heard from Giovanni and Felicia and push it into a more crystallized policy framework and perhaps say some things that some will disagree with, and maybe that would be helpful when we get to the Q&A. I have organized this along the lines of what I think of as the new realities, because there really are some startling new realities in the immigration arena. We don't hear about them in the public debate. We certainly did not hear about them in the campaign debate. Campaigns, of course, are an opportunity to be teachable moments, but that did not take place in this particular campaign. So there are more new realities than what I'm going to describe, but let me just take 4 of them, and building on the information that you've heard, take them to where I think there are some policy answers that we need to be talking about and thinking through. So the first new reality is that I think we are absolutely can confidently say that the era of large-scale illegal immigration from Mexico is over. It is behind us. And that is because of some of the things that Giovanni said, some of the things that Felicia said. There basically have been structural changes in Mexico that are in the fertility, in the age structure, in the economy, in growth, in particularly the growth of a middle class in Mexico, which has never been the case before. And so we now not only have more people returning than coming, as Giovanni said, we also have much less desire on the part of Mexicans to come to the United States illegally. And surveys in Mexico are quite consistent with this net return, that people see their future in Mexico rather than in the tradition of El Norte. Now, is this entirely the case across the board? Of course not. There's not going to be zero illegal immigration from Mexico, but it is now reduced to the point where it's really a manageable flow. With the kind of infrastructure, with the kind of border enforcement that takes place, this is much more of a normal law enforcement challenge, problem, situation, than it is a massive, large-scale issue in the way that it has been over the last 40 years. And that's, of course, a historic shift. So it is a big deal. And what it takes us to is how should we move forward? How should we be thinking about border enforcement in the future? I want to just give you one number that underscores what you've heard up until now about enforcement at the southwest border, because the changes are push-pull. They are in Mexico, they are structural, they also are on the US side. It's a different job market since the recession, and it is an entirely different enforcement environment. The enforcement matters. We now spend, as a country, $19 billion a year on border enforcement. That is 25% more than the federal criminal law enforcement functions that include the FBI, the DEA, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, Marshal Service, the Secret Service. We are spending to the hilt over the course of many years with bipartisan support in both the Congress and in the White House for a much more controlled and enforced southwest border. So when you have that kind of a situation, where should we be going on policy along the southwest border? Well, I would say it certainly does not reside in building a wall. It resides in continuing, obviously, to invest in maintaining and keeping the technology, the personnel, et cetera. But it also means more investment in facilitation of trade and travel. That is part of the border infrastructure that has lagged to an extent, and that's very important for our economies. But at the same time, it does lead us to squarely facing the issue of legal pathways to come to the United States for employment purposes with visas in a regulated system. And that's, of course, what we have not had where the southwest border is concerned. We have had job demand in the United States, and we have not had a way to meet that job demand. You know, you hear so regularly that people should come here legally. It's okay to immigrate. It's okay to come to the United States. We'll tolerate that, but come legally. There is no line to get into to come to the United States legally for the kind of work and jobs that have been generated by this economy for literally millions of people over the course of the last 40 years. So a system whereby we can meet our employment-based needs, not only on the high end, but across the skills spectrum, is essential for us as a country going forward. Now, does that mean we don't have any challenges at the southwest border where enforcement is concerned? Of course not. Southwest border is a very dynamic place. There are all kinds of things from the standpoint of national security, border security, that are important in a well-enforced border. But today's reality, second reality, where southwest border enforcement is concerned, is that the challenge is no longer Mexican illegal immigration in any large-scale numbers. It is mixed flows. It is increasingly diverse flows from other countries than Mexico. And that centers on Central America and the things that you heard Felicia talking about. Because what's going on with the Central American flow is a very big challenge for the future. Central American countries will never rival Mexico in terms of the size. I mean, Central American countries, the Northern Triangle countries, are talking about a population of about 29, 30 million, as against a population in Mexico of about 160 million, I think. And, excuse me, 120? I thought it was a little higher. All right, so it's 30 against 120. It's still considerably greater mass. But the situation with Central Americans and this mixed flow is that you have to have different responses because of what Felicia described, where people's ability to file claims for protection and decide those claims for protection. These are flows that are certainly people that are economic migrants in the way that we've understood and treated the flow from Mexico. But they are also people who are fleeing refugee-like circumstances in many cases. And in order to sort that out, you have to make individual decisions. And the way we make those kinds of decisions is through our political asylum system as well as through our immigration courts. Our immigration courts and our immigration asylum system are both deeply, deeply under-resourced for many years running. We have invested on the front end in enforcement along the border. We have not invested similarly in the other parts of the immigration system that make decisions on these kinds of distinctions within migrant groups. And so you really have now a situation whereby people coming from Central America, and they are the most sympathetic circumstances because they are largely unaccompanied children, they are children and families, they are outpacing for the first time in 2014 and now in 2016 the numbers coming from Mexico. I mean, the new reality are the mixed flows. But with these mixed flows, as was said, they turn themselves over to officials because they know that they can be released into the country pending a hearing. And that hearing will take years to actually come on the docket to be heard. So what happens in the meantime is very humane, and that is that we release people largely to family members because this population is almost entirely a population that has connections in the United States, family connections, but no legal means for family unification in the way that our legal immigration is set up to work. So people are waiting for hearings. Those hearings are going to take years because of backlogs. In the meanwhile, they are in the care and geography of family members, and they are safe. The most important thing is they are safe. But they are safe now for years at a time. They're in a limbo situation, it's true. Their circumstances are unresolved, but they're here. And systemically, that creates a set of feedback loops of information that goes back into the region, into Central America, that is parlayed by smugglers that say, look, what's happened to the person from your village? They got there, they're staying, you should come, pay me to take you there. And that is what happens. And that's been particularly acute now in the last several months as an outgrowth of the campaign and as an outgrowth of the election. There's quite convincing evidence that people are trying very hard in much larger numbers to get into the United States while they still can before a wall is erected. So the answer where border enforcement is concerned at this point is an entirely different kind of investment than is being discussed. The challenge for border enforcement, the answer for border enforcement is investment in our political asylum decision system, investment in our immigration judicial system so that we can make timely decisions. Timeliness in decisions is absolutely essential because what that does is it gives help and relief to those people who are eligible for it so that they can get on with their lives, and it also determines who needs to be returned because return is ultimately the kind of aspect of the immigration system that gives it its credibility and that breaks down those information loops that simply not only perpetuate flows, they also create a crisis of confidence in the broader public that we have any kind of a system that really is credible and workable. Third new reality. Third new reality has to do with many of the things that Giovanni was talking about, which is that there are some important new trends and shapes to the legal immigration flow that really do represent adaptations to lots of things, but partly to a post-recession job reality and economy in this country. Certainly the fact that India and China are now the leading sources of legal immigration. Mexico used to be. It has now slipped to third place. This better educated profile that we see of people coming to the United States is at the high end very important. But one of the things that's really interesting about that higher educational profile is that it is, on the one hand, reflective of the shift to Asian legal immigration and the somewhat decline in Mexican and Latin American immigration, but it is also pointing up a real interesting subtlety that for immigration policy making is important, and that is that we've always done a kind of an either-or as between employment-based immigration, which in our laws is almost entirely high-skilled, and family-based immigration. Family-based immigration has been viewed and has generally been much lower skilled than the employment-based categories. But family-based immigration is the largest share of our legal immigration system. Family-based immigration accounts for about 2/3 of our legal immigration system. And that family-based immigration is now changing as well, so that we're seeing much better skill variety in the family-based immigration, particularly in the middle income skills, which are very important for our economy going forward. So if we were to be able to be rewriting our immigration laws at this point, there really isn't the same ability to say, oh, well, that family-based immigration, we've got to cut that back because that's just a burden on the system. It is, not the kinds of skills that we need. There actually are beginning to be better skill matches, both with family-based immigration, and obviously in the kinds of things that Giovanni talked about with the high-skilled immigration. There's another thing that's happening that is somewhat connected to legal immigration that I just want to point out because we're in California and we're talking about immigration as part of the economy. Of course, we're in Silicon Valley. Of course, H-1B is the big driving issue of interest in Silicon Valley. But another part of California, of course, is agriculture. And agriculture is a tremendously important part of the California economy. And there are some really interesting new trends coming out of California agriculture in the part that is the most labor intensive, fruits, vegetables, fruits, veggies, and nurseries. And that is that because of the enforcement that's been taking place, you now have a tighter labor market where agricultural labor is concerned. Now, most of it, at least half of it is still unauthorized, but that's somewhat less than it has been traditionally. And so in California agriculture, there is a more stable workforce because less people are able to come in and just be an overage of labor supply. And that has led to some interesting shifts that economists would always tell us would happen, but we've never really had a living experiment to demonstrate that it would. People are working longer during the year. Agriculture can be close to a year-round occupation. People in agriculture are older, and therefore they're not quite as able to hoist all those heavy baskets and climb those ladders, and so you're seeing more mechanization, conveyor belts and so forth. You're seeing dwarf trees instead of the ones that you have to go, way high up on. And for the legal immigration system, what that's leading to is not only those kinds of changes with the current workforce, it's also leading to much greater reliance by employers, even here, on the H-2A program. That's the program for seasonal, temporary labor, which traditionally just had not been used in the Southwest because the labor supply illegally coming into the country was so abundant. So for those kinds of realities, it seems to me that the policy takeaway is that even with a really outdated immigration law and system, and ours is for the legal immigration system. It was last enacted changes last made in 1990. That's an eon away in terms of the kinds of changes that have gone on. But it does tell us that certain adaptations actually do take place even within this rather outdated system. And so the way in which we ought to be writing a new immigration law and thinking about a new immigration system, if we could get to that, is to really take out of our statutes numbers that are actually written into the statute that then get baked in for 10, 20, 30 years, and instead have a machinery, have a mechanism within the immigration law by which you can adjust as you go. One of the things that we've always been very, very in support of at the Migration Policy Institute is a kind of either new government agency, small, or a commission of some kind that would actually on a regular basis be analyzing what's going on in the economy vis-a-vis immigration, that is a legitimate governmental function, and that we would, through that, be making regular recommendations to the Congress to adjust the levels on a year-to-year basis, in the way that we do, for instance, with refugees coming to the country, because circumstances change vis-a-vis the people that are coming. Finally, let me talk about legal status and the issue of legalization, because there is no issue that has been more controversial in bringing us to an impasse and an inability to move on immigration legislation than the disagreement over what to do about the 11 million people in the country who are unauthorized. And there, I just want to underscore another point that Giovanni made. It's so very, very important. Half of the people in the country who are unauthorized have been here more than 10 years. More than 10 years. 80% have been here more than 5 years. So we're talking about populations that are deeply embedded in our economy, in our communities, within families themselves. I mean, the most important characteristic of the unauthorized is that people basically live in mixed households, households that are made up of some unauthorized, some lawful permanent residents, some naturalized, or American, or native-born U.S. citizens. That is very, very complicated socially. So the argument, of course, has been between the very, very strong rationale for a path to citizenship as part of a legal status program versus the opposition, which is deeply, deeply opposed to rewarding lawbreaking and to what is seen as a reward for illegal activity that then creates a magnet for continued future flows. I think we now have real evidence from the DACA program, from some of the other limited legal status programs that are in place, that any kind of legal status is better than no legal status. So for me, the fourth reality is really let's look at what we know about this legal status issue and try to figure out whether there isn't a center that can create a compromise on this issue that has crippled us in terms of moving forward with immigration reform. Because what we see with people that have limited forms of legal status is along the lines of things that Felicia talked about. I mean, we see in the DACA population that 60% of people who got DACA got a better job as a result of having a limited legal status. 90% of them got a driver's license, which is hugely important in terms of not only safety, but mobility, being part of the economy. There are all kinds of numbers that are very persuasive. Average wages went from $10 an hour to $14 an hour. These are really important advancements where the economy is concerned and a partial aspect of immigrant integration. So for me, the policy takeaway there is that we actually could create real progress for people in their own lives and for the country more broadly in terms of the economy and in terms of participation in the economy if we were willing to go a limited way with legal status and leave the issue of citizenship for another day. It would come up another day, but right now, if we gave people, if they passed a criminal background check, if they got a work permit, if they were protected from deportation, and if they were permitted to travel in and out of the country, it would be transformative. So let me close with that by saying that unfortunately, educating decision makers about these kinds of issues really is an uphill battle. It has been for a long time. It's certainly going to continue to be so. But if we don't do so, we are not going to be able to make policies that are in any way in the national interest, in the way immigration must be, can be, and has been throughout our history. Thank you.